In the history of American Cosa Nostra, the threat of violence is just as important as its use, and nearly every member and associate in its history is capable. There are individuals, however, who stand out even among their peers in the underworld. These mobsters are the 30 most feared wise guys in American Cosa Nostra. Number 12. Murder Incorporated member Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Harry Strauss was born on July 28, 1909, to Jacob and Yetta Ostrowski. The family would immigrate from Russia to the United States in 1914 and change their last name to Strauss. The family would then settle in New York City's Lower East Side. Harry's father, Jacob, died when he was young, and his relationship with his mother was tumultuous at best. With no close-knit family life to speak of, Strauss would drop out of school at 15, and by the age of 18 was already committing crimes. In 1927, he would be charged with felonious assault and possession of a revolver. Then in 1928, he would be arrested 3 different times and charged with robbery, assault, and auto theft, respectively. The cases would be dismissed for lack of evidence, and he would next appear in Brownsville, where he would strike up friendships with future Murder Incorporated members Abe Relis and Happy Mayone. Relis, Strauss, and Mayone would become the nucleus of the gang called the Brownsville Boys, which operated out of the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, New York. This gang, along with the Bugs and Meyer mob, were the precursors to the formation of Murder Incorporated. Murder Incorporated became the enforcement arm of the National Syndicate and would be led by Louis Lepke Buckhalter, Albert Anastasia, and Joe Adonis. Murder Incorporated is believed to be responsible for between 400 and 1,000 murders. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss was involved in a large number of these killings and was in many ways a trailblazer in the field of murder. Strauss would tie victims up in contorted knots before stabbing them repeatedly with an ice pick, which was his murder instrument of choice. Strauss was also one of the first to puncture the stomach and lungs to prevent floating after a body he had tied to a slot machine was thrown in the river, bloated, and came back to the water's surface. Strauss also never carried a weapon on his person unless he was on a hit. Many of the procedures Strauss used when doing a hit were passed down to other hitmen in future generations. Pittsburgh Phil also did a number of hits out of state for the syndicate, as well as being lent out to other criminal organizations. Many historians link Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss to upwards of 100 murders, making him possibly the most pervasive hitman in the history of organized crime. He was arrested 18 times but was never convicted until he was found guilty of homicide that sent him and fellow Murder Incorporated hitman Martin Bugsy Goldstein to the electric chair. The case that would end the life of Harry Strauss began in 1940, when Abe Kid Twist Relis was implicated in a number of killings. Realizing that he himself faced execution if convicted, Relis became a government witness. Relis testified against Louis Lepke Buckhalter, Louis Capone, Mendy Weiss, Harry Mayone, Frank Abondando, Bugsy Goldstein, and Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, linking them all to various murders. Strauss in particular was arrested for causing the death of Irving Puggy Feinstein and at least 5 other known murders. Strauss tried to avoid conviction by feigning insanity in the courtroom and on death row. Strauss and Goldstein were convicted September 19, 1940, and executed by electrocution using Sing Sing's Old Sparky on June 12, 1941. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss will be remembered not only because of the number of murders committed, but also the level of brutality used, as one of the deadliest, most feared hitmen in the history of organized crime. Number 11. Colombo Captain Charlie Moose Panarello. Charles Joseph Panarello was born on January 5, 1922, though some sources have his date of birth as January 5, 1925. Panarella gravitated to a life of crime early and was arrested for the first time in 1940. He would do a short stint in prison before being paroled in 1941, where he would immediately return to a life of crime. His early record included arrests for assault, burglary, extortion, and possession of a loaded firearm. After a time, Charlie Moose, as Panarello was sometimes known, would be inducted into what was then the Profaci crime family. He would be placed in the crew of Johnny Bath Beach Otto, who ran extensive gambling and extortion rackets in Brooklyn. It was during this time he earned a fearsome reputation within the New York underworld as one of the most brutal hitmen in the city. It is alleged that on an early hit, Panarella forced his victim to eat his own testicle before killing him. During the war with the gallows, Panarella, Joe Iacovelli, Alphonse Persico, and Jerry Langella just missed being assassinated after they were spotted by Albert Gallo. The men decided to change tables and a different group took their place. These people were in the wrong place at the wrong time when the assassin opened up, killing Sheldon Epstein and Max Telkich and wounding 2 other men instead of the Colombo mobsters. With Joe Colombo in a coma, the leadership of the family was in flux, and with Colombo underboss Charles Charlie Lemons Mineo not interested in the top spot, it seemed that Carmine the Snake Persico would be the next boss. However, Carmine Persico had legal problems and was headed to prison. This would lead to Vincent Alloy stepping in for a time before Persico installed loyalist Thomas DeBella. However, in the meantime, powerful and violent Colombo capo Dominic Mimi Sciallo was also believed by the Persico faction to be angling for the top spot. With a solid crew behind him and Carmine Persico in prison, Sciallo seemed to be a legitimate threat to Persico leadership. This problem solved itself for the Persicos when allegedly an intoxicated Sciallo cursed and berated elderly Gambino family boss Carlo Gambino at a restaurant in 1974. It seemed Dominic Mimi Sciallo's days were numbered, and it was Charlie the Moose Panarella who got the contract. Panarella and Joey Brancato set Sciallo up and murdered him shortly thereafter. Panarella would become the acting captain of the Otto crew in 1972 and became the full-fledged captain the very next year. Charlie Moose's crew became one of the most feared in the city, boasting names like Scarpa, Lo Cicero, Tropagno, and Miraglia. Panarella and his crew were responsible for numerous hits and much notoriety throughout the 1970s, so much so that at one point, the news media incorrectly named Panarella as the new boss of the Colombo family. In the mid-80s, some of the soldiers in Panarella's crew lodged a complaint against him to boss Carmine Persico. Persico had already been weary of Panarella and longtime Colombo powerhouse John Sonny Francis teaming up and seizing power. These fears were likely unfounded, but Persico would use the complaint anyway to demote Panarella and send him to Vegas. Panarella would not forget the slight and would later side with Vic Orena in the Third Colombo War. Charlie Moose did not get heavily involved in the conflict, but was called upon to kill an associate named James Jimmy Beans Brunetto, after Brunetto was found to have molested a 9-year-old boy in the back of R&J Health Studio. The boy was the grandson of Vic Orena. It is rumored that Brunetto was tortured severely before ending up in a 55-gallon drum. Despite being a high-value target, no one was sent to kill Panarella during the war. Not even feared street general Greg Scarpa Sr. would make an attempt on the wily Panarella. After the war, Panarella remained in good standing. He was later convicted in 1994 of attempting to launder drug money through the cashier's cage at Maxim Casino in Las Vegas as part of a scheme to purchase a farm for $500,000 to $1 million. Panarella served 15 months and was released in 1996. Though living in Las Vegas in his later years, Panarella still had interests and responsibilities in New York City. During that time, Panarella was responsible for maintaining a tight grip on Locals 14 and 15 of the International Union of Operating Engineers. Panarella had years earlier infiltrated the union's leadership and influenced the union to do Colombo crime family bidding. Even as an old man, his fearsome reputation remained intact. In the summer of 2001, Panarella met in New York with Genovese family representatives over a dispute in Brooklyn. The Genovese family controlled most of the so-called no-show construction jobs in Brooklyn, and the Colombo family wanted their fair share. Unfortunately for Panarella, the meeting location was bugged, and law enforcement picked up clear evidence that he was acting as a member of the Colombo family. An interesting bit picked up by the bug described how the Cosa Nostra family still viewed Panarella. Quoting underboss Jackie DeRoss, "Panarella would chop your fucking head off. He's an old man, but you know what? They're still shitting their pants about Panarella." Charles Panarella is without a doubt one of the most feared mobsters in the history of Cosa Nostra.